Right, we had the first frost where I live the other day, so it's getting to that time, them cold winter months. And we have to think about what we're doing a little bit more really, like in the old winter. It does get a bit hard, but the rewards are there nevertheless. So my number one piece of advice would be to choose the water that you fish quite carefully in the winter. Waters like this one, Cemex's Sandhurst Lake, are quite shallow, so they tend to respond to favourable conditions in the winter. So if you get like a nice bit of warm weather, places like Sandhurst tend to warm up, and quite quickly too. I mean, one example was I fished here and I basically got bites probably 2 days after the lake defrosted. It was completely frozen. 2 days later it defrosted and we managed to get bites because the water warmed up just that little bit. So equally, some waters switch off. Some waters which are like pretty good waters in summer, because they're quite deep or whatever, tend not to warm up and tend not to respond to favourable winter conditions. So choose your water carefully would be my first bit of advice. Number two, carp are creatures of habit. Now, more often than not, the same winter areas produce year in, year out. Now, there's a few areas here over on Sandhurst, deep silty depressions, and this is where invariably the fish end up every winter. If they're not in one depression, they'll be in another. So equally, there'll be areas where fish just don't go, or very rarely go in the hard depths of winter, like shallow areas and all this kind of thing. So there equally might be areas that you've heard about that on your particular water have never produced a winter capture, so they'll be the ones to steer clear of. Check out the aerial photography websites. You'll get like views from above where you can check out where them mega shallow areas are, and you'll see, you know, there'll be like 2 foot of water, big expanses of 2 and 3 foot of water, which just wouldn't be a good winter proposition. Equally, you can see where them deeper areas are. So there'll be particular areas, deeper silty areas, next to island margins, that kind of thing, nice deep back bays and whatever, where basically they're likely winter areas and are always worth a try. Carp will feed just as voraciously in the winter as they do in the summer, but in more localised hotspots. Like one example I can use is when I was fishing over at Frimley Pit 2, like a few years ago. I was fishing next to this, like basically a marginal bush, about 2 foot off it, something like that, fishing with a stiff rig set up, a chocolate malt pop-up, and like a handful of sweet corn over the top when I got there. And I got, I think, about 7 or 8 bites that particular day. And it was all on this one particular spot. I'd get a bite, basically go back around there, put another handful of corn out, whack the bait back out there and get a bite within something like 15 minutes, but all on that one particular spot. I didn't need to be too near the bush, or basically if I was like a couple of foot off it, I wouldn't get a bite and I'd have to recast and I'd get a bite. Another one is my mate Dave Benton. He had some incredible amount of bites down here one February, but all on one rod going out to one particular spot which he'd marked up with a bit of tape on his line. And every time he took it out to that spot and dropped, like, because he was using the bait boat, because he's a bit of a cheater, Dave, every time he dropped, he'd get, you know, it'd be bang on this marker. If he was 5 foot beyond it, or 5 foot to the right, he wouldn't get a bite. But all the action, I think it was something like 40-odd fish in like 3 nights fishing, all came to that one particular rod on that one particular spot. So always bear that in mind. Right, my advice would always be to veer even more to the side of caution when it comes to baits and all that kind of thing. Don't go in too heavy on the bait. Say, for example, a little free bait stringer is a good one with these like little 12mm baits. Alternatively, I'd use like a little bag or something with that. Only a mouthful, because you're only fishing for one bite and one mouthful at a time. So like a small bag I've got there with some of the old Sutton specials all crumbled up, or equally that one tiny little bag there. Just a bit of nut meal in there, which is quite a nice bait. So I'd fish like something like that, or as I say, a 2 bait stringer, a 3 bait stringer, just one mouthful at a time. If we're talking about like baits in the winter, I've always done well on the old Richworth Tutti Fruities. I'm going to give John's bait a try this winter. Things like our pineapple pop-ups, these are a good one. The old Nutribaits pineapple and butyric acid, I've done quite well on them, and I know Martin Pick's done quite well on them as well, like used in conjunction with the sweet corn stringer. As I say, yeah, sweet corn's a good one. Like, as I said, I got like a fair few bites at one time, like just with a handful of corn around it, because it's quite visual. In the winter, where conditions allow, like I always try and scale down my presentation a little bit. So say for example in the summer I would have used like 15-pound line on one particular water that I was fishing. Over here on Sandhurst during the winter I find I can scale down to like 12-pound GR60 like, because there's no real snags in the water, and it's pretty clear out there, you know. I mean, like terminal tackle wise, equally I'd scale it down again. I mean, in this case I've got like a simple KD rig there, 10-pound Suffix Cam Fusion, and on there I've got like a size 9 Drennan barb hook, which is like a straight point hook with an in-turned eye, really nice, very, very sharp point, and very, very strong. Another good one's ESP 12-pound strip tees. I use that especially for the old Magaliner and that, because the braid inside is so thin and fine, and that's good for the old KD rig as well and that, but you have to steam that one just to straighten it out really. I mean, like hook-wise, one of my favourites, size 10 wide gate, called a wide gate, which is a really good hook. You can use that for that KD rig. Alternatively, things like size 10 or 12 Gardner Muggers, or the old Atomic Claws. Again, that one's an in-turned point with an in-turned eye. That's a good, sharp, small hook. So always fine your presentation down if you can. The old maggots come into their own in the winter. I mean, as many people well know, I caught like a fair few fish, one like kind of January, February, at the old bailiffs over there, and also at like number 13 on the Magaliner, which is just an absolutely awesome rig. So yeah, because of the lack of small fish activity, the silverfish activity, you can get away with using the old maggots over here during the winter. So the Magaliner's a good one. And also the Medusa rig. Now that was a rig that I'd not really used up until a couple of years ago, and Leon Bartrop come down here and I see him catch a good fish on the old Medusa, so I asked him, what's that all about, mate? Because literally I'd never used it and didn't really know about it. So he showed me what he was doing, and what he was doing was using between like 30 and 40 maggots on the end of the hair, so to speak, like threaded on there, a couple of buoyant ones on there, so it's a big ball like that, big ball of maggots. And I think it worked because it was just like a take it or leave it scenario in the winter, and it was too good an opportunity to miss for the fish. You know, they see this great big ball of food there and they took it into their mouths, and I caught a real good common over there, like a 37-pound common on the Medusa, using 30 maggots, a few kind of like soft buoyant ones on a KD rig, and that was with a size 9 ESP D7, which was another good hook, you know. So yeah, the maggots come into their own during the winter. You can use them with the Magaliner, with big mag bags or small mag bags, or the old Medusa, and they're always a good option. Right, another one, and this is mega important, is always make sure that you're like comfortable and warm and all of that kind of thing in the winter, because there's nothing like being cold when you're fishing in the winter, because you want to go home. So have adequate shelter, have enough gas with you, enough water to make like loads of cups of tea and cook up some nice food and all that kind of thing. Make sure you've got plenty of clothing, and make sure you've got plenty of spare clothing in case you get a good old fish and you get wet and all that kind of thing. Good pair of boots. I bought an awful pair of boots the other year from the Macro, and they look good, but when I took them fishing, they had no insulation in the feet, and I got cold feet, and I had to go out and buy another pair of boots, and I weren't happy about that, let me tell you. Always pay extra attention to signs of fish or fish catchers, like during the winter. I mean, if you're watching the water, especially early in the morning, even if in the depths of winter, you'll see the odd show, and that'll be them giving them away, because in the winter the fish group up. So if you see one show, you can be sure that there's a number of fish out there. So that's always pay attention to what's going on. Equally, if someone catches a fish on that particular water, you think, oh, they're in that area, and get like an inkling as to where the group of fish are. Never ever neglect a zig in the winter. I mean, over here, we were zigging it up, me and Martin were zigging it up mega early in the year, and it's really funny. I think quite a lot of the time, in the winter, the fish spend a lot of their time like mid-water. They find like a comfortable area in the column of water, and that's where they sit for, you know, for good long periods of time. So quite often, the fish won't drop down to the bottom. They'll just sit there in that comfortable zone. So I've always thought you might as well bring the, you know, not fish on the bottom, almost, quote, bring the battle to them, and fish a zig right in amongst them. So as they're sat there in their kind of semi-torpid state in the winter, it's too good an opportunity to miss, and I think they'll always turn round and take the zig into their mouths, and never neglect a zig in the winter. If you find that correct depth, you can properly have it off. Always fish 1 or 2 rovers, depending on how many rods you're using, 2 or 3. It always pays to like keep one rod moving about, trying to find the fish in the depth of water. Right? Cast it out. If you don't get a bite on it, have a recast, and like that one you might get a bite on, so then you can switch the other rod onto it and you're zoning in on the fish, so to speak. So always fish 1 or 2 as rovers. Another one is, and there was a fella called Dave Miller, who's an exceptionally good angler. He used to fish over at Frimley, and he did exceptionally well during the winter. And that would be that basically he'd always have a spare rod behind him with his rig and another stringer or whatever it was, like ready to go. So what he'd do, he'd have a fish, and as soon as that fish was in the net, he could turn around, grab his spare rod, whack that back out there to where he'd caught the fish from, and more often than not, he'd get a bite straight after that as well, because there was more fish feeding there, again, in that localised spot, but for a shorter period of time. So always maximise your time in the winter. Yeah, they're my tips for the winter fishing, and I hope they bring you a bit of success.